Thank you very much for having invited me to this wonderful event. This is the first time actually I'm hearing about this event, but I am deeply honored to be in the presence of Her Royal Highness, who is kindly gracing this occasion. At the same time, I'm very happy to see a lot of, I believe, students from the United States, as well as members of the Bhutan Foundation, to which I also belong as a Director Emeritus. And we just concluded a board meeting this morning. What I wanted to talk to you about was, the Bhutan Forest Act of 1969 and what transpired around this act. First of all, I would like to say that as far as forests are concerned, deforestation, these issues are very problematic today, as even in the international community. As you know, recently at the 74th session of the United Nations General Assembly in New York, you had a climate summit. And in the climate summit, most of you must have heard about the statement that was made by the Swedish activist Greta Thunberg. And from this we came to gather that the international community is still to get its act together. We are still to have a common platform where all countries in the world can act together to address global warming, climate change, sea level rise, deforestation. So these are issues which are being discussed in the international community. But what is happening is that we just don't seem to get our act together. And this has resulted in problems, as you know, through global warming. We have these cyclones, you have forest fires, you have all these natural calamities, including floods all over the world, which are directly linked to climate change and global warming. When it comes to Bhutan itself, I am very proud to hear the statements that are being made all over the world by our elected prime ministers, by our ministers, telling the world that Bhutan is carbon negative, that Bhutan has a forest cover at present because of effective management of nearly 72%, that the constitution of Bhutan mandates that Bhutan has to keep a minimum area of 60% under forests. And this is something we are all proud of. In other words, we have done a lot to safeguard our environment, our biodiversity, and our ecological heritage. But we must realize that all this has happened because of certain actions that were taken in the past. And this is where I come to the Forest Act of 1969. In the late part of the 1960s and even the 70s, as recently as even in the 1980s, the international community talked very little about the environment, the consciousness and the realization of how the environment was being affected by human activity had not really surfaced. And in Bhutan and in our region, I don't think we talked about the issues of the environment or global warming at that time. However, in 1969, what had happened was we had just completed the first 5-year plan in Bhutan, and we were in the process of implementing the second 5-year plan. And what had happened was the main thrust of those plans was to make Bhutan accessible. And the accessibility was by constructing of roads from the southern borderlands into the central areas of Bhutan. So you had the Samduzongkar-Tashigang highway, later on extended to Monga. Then you had the Phunsoling, Paro and Thimphu, and later on extended to Ha and Wongdifodrang. Then in the central region, you had the highway from Gelefu to Tongsa, and in 1969, it had not reached Bumthang. I remember going with His Royal Highness Namgyal Wangchu on horseback to Bumthang in the most traditional way. I wish it was still like that, actually. So with these roads coming in from the south, what we realized was wherever the roads accessed these forest regions, the exploitation of forests became an issue. We could see this all around in our neighborhood. And wherever they had forest roads going into these areas, forest extraction, especially for economic reasons, was taking place. So we realized that with these roads coming into Bhutan, what would happen was we had to be careful as far as forest exploitation was concerned. Secondly, we found out that with this new development, our earlier laws, rules, and regulations were inadequate to really control the situation. For instance, our forest department at that time was really minuscule. The forest department, we had very few trained foresters who could handle the situation at that time. We were short of forestry personnel. So what happened was we had to request the government of India to send forest officials to Bhutan. So I remember in 1969, we had what was known as a conservator of forests, Mr. R.C. Prasad. We had to recruit people from the Forest Department of Assam. I remember Mr. Dole, forest officials like Mr. Brahma. All these people were recruited by Bhutan in order to fill the minimal gap that was required to administer our forests. In fact, Lyonpo Doji and Dashonado Rinchen were one of the first forest officers trained. And in 1969, I think Lyonpo was still a forest ranger. He was just becoming a divisional forest officer. So the other thing that Poropenlop at that time, His Royal Highness Poropenlop at that time, he was appointed the Tenje Lempo. Tenje Lempo was Minister for Trade, Industries and Forests, and in 1969 His Royal Highness was also given the responsibility of handling the Forests Department. So what happened was His Royal Highness realized that the land use laws and regulations had also become out of date. As far as we as villagers understood, firstly, there was the forests allowed us to have like Kimsa. Kimsa is like where you can construct your house and you can have some sort of a kitchen garden. Then there was Chujing. Chujing was for planting rice. Then Kamjing, which could be used for planting crops like maize or corn, and it was not easily possible to irrigate these lands. Then there was Tseri. In the east we had this Tseri use of land, which was slash and burn cultivation, or I think on the Indian side they call it Jhum cultivation. And this was a very destructive practice, but we had to allow this if food sufficiency was to be met. So this had to be allowed. Then we had sokshing. Sokshing was collection of leaf manure. But land didn't belong to the people, but they could collect the leaf manure and maintain the trees. Then we had chamdo. Chamdo for grazing cattle or yaks in the north. And the people reserved vast areas of land so that they could graze their cattle. So this was something like the land pattern in Bhutan. But what was not clear was who owned these lands. It was clear that in the first four categories, like Khimsa, your house land, dry land, Kamshing, then you had Chujing and Seri. In these categories of land, this was definitely the ownership or registration of these lands was with the people. But when it came to Sokshing and Chamdo, it was not clear whether the rights of the people to graze their cattle and collect leaf manure also gave them the ownership of the land. So this had to be made very clear. Otherwise, the forests, we would have had a serious problem. Then the reserved areas, reserved forests, did not exist. We just had Manas, which was a game sanctuary, and we had Phipsu, which was another area reserved as sort of hunting grounds, and that was about all. So in the 1969 Act, His Royal Highness, when he went to the National Assembly, he clearly explained to the people that, number one, as far as the minerals under the soil of Bhutan is concerned, that the ownership is with the state, whether it is private land, whether it is government land. Number two, in Chamdo and Sokshing areas, that is for grazing lands and for the leaf manure collection, those lands belong to the government. And this was made clear, but the traditional rights of the people was maintained. Number one, the traditional right, they could still use the Chamdo for grazing, they could use the Sokshing areas for taking out leaf manure, then they could extract trees for house construction, both in the north and in the south. They could extract firewood for use in their homes. So none of the traditional rights that the people had were in any way deprived. So with this and the tremendous, how does this? This is the Forest Act. I don't know, it looks like a very old copy. But this is His Royal Highness Namgyal Wangchuck. And today, I credit him for having gotten through the 1969 Forest Act, and hadn't it been for the tremendous influence that His Royal Highness exercised, I don't think we would have got the 69 Act through in that assembly session. It would have been postponed and postponed and postponed. And why I put up these pictures of His Royal Highness is that just recently, about a few days ago, I came across a photograph of His Royal Highness in the Facebook. And someone was asking the question, who is this personality? So it seems that one of our most famous royal family members is being forgotten because he's left service. But he played a very important role in this process. And after that, with His Majesty's blessings, both the third King of Bhutan as well as the fourth King of Bhutan, we took over vast areas of the country which were unoccupied. It was not habited, but they were converted into reserved forest areas, and that's why you have 72% of the Bhutan's area under forests. Hadn't it not been for these steps, I was quite convinced that the same thing that happened in the surrounding areas of Bhutan, I don't want to name names, but the surrounding areas of Bhutan, they've all hacked down their forests. Okay. And the same thing was going to happen here had it not been for the decisions taken by their majesties and spearheaded by no lesser person than His Royal Highness Paropellop. So this was the reason why actually I agreed to give a talk on the Bhutan Forest Act. I wanted to emphasize the tremendous role that His Royal Highness played. And this is me with His Royal Highness in 2006 when I visited. So the thing is this, that what I feel is that Bhutan's impact on the overall environment of the world may look very small. Our area is 38,394 square kilometers as per the information which I obtained. And the area of the globe is 510 million square kilometers. So the impact looks as if it's minuscule. However, the example that Bhutan has given, I think is really large and really big. I think that this is what we have to understand. So thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to give you this small talk on Bhutan and its past. Thank you.